LEO is low or Earth orbit satellites, or anything that's in a low Earth orbit. And this is an orbit that basically sits about 200 kilometers to 2,000 kilometers above the Earth's surface. And it's different from MEOs or MEOs, middle Earth orbit, or GEOs, which are geosynchronous orbit satellites, or anything that's at about 36,000 kilometers.
Why does the fact that it's sitting in a low Earth orbit matter?
Right. So in essence, the reason why it matters is because it actually can improve the quality of service that satellites can provide with regard to broadband connectivity. When you have satellites that are sitting at about 36,000 kilometers above the Earth's orbit in a geostationary orbit, what that means is there's a long distance that bits of traffic have to traverse from wherever you are on the Earth's surface to the satellite and back down. So what happens with communications over geosatellites is you have something called a high level of latency. And
Which takes a long time for the signal to reach you, right?
Exactly. And we couldn't do this conversation if we were doing it through a geosynchronous satellite, because you would feel that latency. It wouldn't be natural.
All right, so, but low Earth satellites have been around, low Earth orbit satellites have been around for a while. Why are they suddenly more important? Why are they relevant?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. I mean, LEO satellites and LEO constellations have been used for a long time. I mean, the International Space Station, for example, sits at about 420 kilometers in a low Earth orbit. The Hubble Space Telescope is at about 500. And so this is nothing new with regard to where you can place satellites. What is new is that the technology for satellites has improved. The case for the need for broadband communications has been demonstrated, and you have an ability to launch satellites and rockets at this point in time that are a lot lower than back in the 1990s, when the first sort of generations of LEO broadband constellations were first conceived, and essentially they failed back in the 90s.
All right, so if I understand you correctly, you're saying it's now cheaper to put these satellites up into space, and given their cheapness and their better use for broadband, we can put lots of them up there and use them to transmit internet signals.
Exactly. The technology is better. The case for broadband is more apparent today, and the cost to get them into orbit is a lot lower today.
Still, why is this interesting? I mean, we have broadband available through wires, we have broadband available through 4G. Why do we need satellites?
Yeah. So this is a question we face a lot, especially particularly working on internet connectivity and internet development in the context of an international development organization and with donor development peers. Why do we care about internet connectivity? Look, I mean, the simple answer is, look what happened last year, right? Last year, there was this massive hit, external shock to the global economy, to social development progress, and because of the coronavirus pandemic. But what we saw was that internet connectivity, internet infrastructure, essentially provided a little bit of a dampening effect, so that people were still able to transact, to learn, to engage with medical professionals and facilities through telemedicine. So we care about internet connectivity because of its impact to growth and social development. Now, to your question specifically about why do we care about satellite, there's about 3.6 billion people in the world who aren't using the internet, and there's about 5 billion people in the world who are living more than 10 kilometers away from fiber optic cable and fiber infrastructure. And so,
a large number of them in Asia, presumably.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of them are in Asia, or in areas that are developing countries, or large geographic expanses, or landlocked countries, or small island developing states.
So what you're saying is that we've got a lot of people who don't have access to internet simply because they're a long way away from any technology or any infrastructure that allows them to get access to the signal. And these satellites can potentially fill that gap.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, satellite connectivity plays a pivotal role in the broader internet infrastructure ecosystem, because you're able to reach remote and rural communities. You're able to respond quickly in, for example, disaster situations where the existing terrestrial infrastructure is wiped out, or if you want to connect mobile phone systems, that are quite distant from fiber. This is where satellite comes into play.
All right. I mean, I can see the value of this, say, in the context of a natural disaster, where you need to get access to people very quickly. You need to get access to information very quickly. You need transmission capacity very quickly. But these are rare occasions. And I also get the fact that people in outlying districts, would like to be connected to the internet. But what is the economics of this? I mean, even if we do get much cheaper satellite availability and we can transmit broadband signals to remote areas, is it still economical for Asian developing countries to consider this as a solution for their rural community?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things that we present in the paper and we show is that, first of all, broadband communications is being provided today by satellite connectivity across the region. One of the efforts that we see here in the Philippines, for example, is utilizing broadband connectivity to connect schools on remote islands and in communities that actually also are off grid. So satellite connectivity is being used today. But what we're seeing with LEO is that the overall capacity that will be put up by LEO constellations is expected to be about 10x the amount of capacity that's up there right now. So think about any finite resource that is quite expensive. I mean, if you add 10x to the supply of that resource, that changes the dynamics with regard to pricing.
So this is underway, right? I mean, we have a number of technology providers who are putting those satellites up there. We're expecting to see this market grow considerably over the coming years, but we're still very much at the beginning stage of this process, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And we make that clear in the paper, right? I mean, what we're seeing right now are a number of LEO constellations that are in development. None of them are actually providing commercial service at this point, but these organizations, these companies like SpaceX with its Starlink program, like Amazon with its Project Kuiper, Telesat with Lightspeed, OneWeb, and a number of others, they're putting in a lot of investment into these constellations. But you're absolutely right. We are still at a stage where this is pre-commercialization, and all of the service that's being provided by essentially Starlink is still in a beta stage. So
let's assume for a minute that Starlink and all the other providers that you're talking about do go ahead at this pace with these ideas, and within 2 to 5 years, Asian developing countries have access to affordable satellite-based broadband communications technology. What does your report say about how we should navigate this transition process, and what are the opportunities for these developing countries, and how should they avail themselves of this opportunity?
From a government or a regulatory and policy perspective, what you want to do for your population is to provide as much competition at improved quality of service that you can. So you want to be looking at these LEO constellations from the perspective of, okay, how do we facilitate competitive market entry of these services so that not only direct consumers can benefit, but also the domestic and local service providers can avail of this backhaul capacity that's coming from these LEO, potentially coming from these LEO constellations. Same thing if you're a service provider or you're an enterprise. Let's say you're an enterprise or a company that's operating in some way where you need connectivity. We have a lot of companies that are operating in remote and rural areas that need connectivity and are not able to really leverage the digital economy for their activities. So this would be one thing, one more thing to monitor because it could improve that infrastructure for their day-to-day operations.
The policy environment, the regulatory environment, which governs satellite and data transfer and internet connectivity and all that kind of stuff, which has its own regional and cross-border implications, that's one area. The other area is the commercial side of it. Let's look at it from the commercial side first for a second, a little bit more deeply, because what we have here is the question of infrastructure. I mean, the Asian Development Bank specializes in infrastructure, and this can be seen as an infrastructure play. Should governments take it upon themselves to provide this infrastructure capacity and put that in place, or is this something that should be built through incentives to the private sector and develop this as some kind of a commercial go-forward play?
Yeah, so there's a couple dimensions here. So there's the regulatory and policy side to facilitate the entry of this commercial service, and these are things around the licensing of satellite connectivity, around how internet service providers can acquire internet capacity, international internet capacity. There's policy and regulatory actions, but then there's direct interventions that governments can take. I mean, a number of governments in the region already directly support the rollout of internet infrastructure to remote and rural areas through the use of universal service funds, for example. So directly subsidizing rollout to some areas. So that's one area too that could potentially be reviewed by some governments and supporting the communities themselves in some of the initial costs to be able to access satellite connectivity with the terminals.
So from what you're saying, it all makes perfect sense. I mean, there's no reason why this should not be the future of Asian connectivity, at least for rural areas. Or are there obstacles? I mean, what potential obstacles are there that will stop this from being the next phase of internet connectivity?
Yeah, so you're right. The technology looks like it's working based off of what we're seeing with the beta launches. The technology looks like it's working. The business models still remain to be seen. How these entities are actually going to go to market. Are they going to go directly to consumer, or are they going to focus on enterprise segments, or focus on government customers? So it remains to be seen on the business model side. And then there's the policy and regulatory side. I mean, there may be markets where these constellations decide that they don't want to try and enter and provide service because of either artificial barriers on the policy side, or maybe the markets may not be large enough. When it comes to, okay, is this real or not? I mean, again, we're at early stages, right? We don't actually see commercial service being deployed as yet. And there are things to be concerned about. I mean, one is the cost of the terminals themselves that individuals like you and I or communities would have to purchase. I mean, these are still significant capital expenditures.
So hold on, let's just look at that scenario a little bit more closely for a second. I mean, you're talking about terminals and you've mentioned consumers a couple of times. I mean, so far we've been talking about high-tech, big investment infrastructure, mostly handled by big business on a global level. What does it mean for people on the ground? I mean, you're talking about terminals here. Give me a business model that somebody living in a rural area in Laos, for instance, would think might work for them and would go to their government and say, look, please make this possible.
Yeah, so from the beta programs that we've been monitoring, and from the materials that we're seeing from the LEO constellations in development, what we're essentially seeing is that if you or I or our neighbors living in a country, say in Southeast Asia, would like to avail of broadband connectivity that comes from a LEO constellation, you're going to need to purchase and acquire the antenna, the satellite antenna that's connecting to the LEO satellite. You're going to need to do that, and you're going to need to have some sort of local area network capability with a Wi-Fi router, for example. And so from the beta service, we're seeing that this is costing, at least through Starlink, $500 for the terminal, and then a monthly service fee of about $100. Now, there's questions on if these are subsidized pricing levels with the terminal, if these are prices that will be applied also to developing member countries, or if these are just focused on high-income countries. And then also in the go-to-market process, are these entities going to focus just on serving individuals, let's say you and I in our homes, or do something around, let's say, community Wi-Fi engagements, where you do have one terminal that's connected to a Wi-Fi hotspot and is able to serve 100, 200, 300 people in a community Wi-Fi environment where people are able to purchase at a much smaller consumption level. And this is something we're seeing the geos do already in Indonesia, for example, in Latin America, where community Wi-Fi through satellite is a proven way to go to market.
You know, the way markets like this tend to develop, particularly where you have big multinational corporations with high expenditures involved, is that it's not a smooth progression, is it? We've got Starlink is one of the big players in there, but you've mentioned a number of other who are getting involved. And I can look forward a couple of years and think, somebody in rural Asia is going to subscribe to a service on one particular platform or one particular product that's been put up there, and then we'll see mergers and acquisitions, or we'll see bankruptcies and changes of hands of businesses, there's a potentially fairly rocky path between here and widespread connectivity in Asia, isn't there?
Yeah, and this is sort of what's interesting to monitor about what's happening with all of this development in LEO. I mean, we talked about the 10x or more increase in satellite capacity, and all this private sector investment that's going into these constellations. One of those entities we've already seen has gone through restructuring to be able to continue with its business plan. So with this whatever you want to call it, this glut of capacity that we're going to see hopefully emerge, it's going to benefit consumers and hopefully the prices that consumers are paying. But yeah, I mean, it could lead to a lot of dynamics within the provision of LEO itself, with entities that may not be able to figure out how to continue with their business plans or our acquisitions. I mean, the satellite connectivity space in general, even with LEO, it is it's a dynamic and risky space. And even last year, we saw not just this one LEO entity, but a few others go through restructuring because of some of the issues with the slowdown in the global economy. So yeah, watch this space because it's going to be a very dynamic sector moving forward.
So what is the ADB doing? What can the ADB do to help governments, to help businesses, help Asia to avail itself and to be ready to adopt this technology?
Well, the Asian Development Bank's focus is on addressing issues of absolute poverty through the use of loans, of grants, and technical assistance to its developing member countries in Asia. And so with regard to LEO constellations, there's a range of potential interventions and touch points within the Asian Development Bank. Of course, there's what we've talked about with regard to technical assistance around regulatory and policy issues. There have been investments that have been made by the ADB, both on supporting governments with sovereign debt to invest in internet infrastructure, as well as on the private sector operations side, with investments directly into mobile network operators, as well as a geo-satellite company. So there's a number of different ways for developing member countries to engage the ADB when they're starting to think about, okay, well, how do we prepare for LEO constellations? The bottom line is that connectivity really is it's a means, right? It's a means to the bigger mission that we have, and that's really addressing absolute poverty through economic growth and the improvement of service delivery in social development programming. So there's different ways to be able to engage, and we hope that the release of this report spurs those types of engagements and conversations between the developing member countries and the Asian Development Bank.
All right, well, the report itself has a great deal more detail than we've covered so far, and it's available on the ADB website.
That's right.
Okay, we'll put a link into it in the article that we've got online, and hopefully people will find out more. Presumably, this isn't the last step of the ADB work in ensuring greater connectivity. I mean, have you got more work coming along in this line?
We're working on the next working paper as we speak.